My name is Claire Whitfield. I am 32 years old, and 19 days before my younger sister's wedding, my parents sent me an email with the subject line, "Wedding conditions, please confirm by Friday." I remember opening it on my lunch break, sitting alone in my car outside the office because the break room was too loud that day. I remember thinking it was strange that my own parents needed a subject line at all. We had never been a family that emailed each other. We called, we showed up, we argued in kitchens, not in inboxes, so the formality of it, the coldness of, "Please confirm by Friday," told me something before I had even read a single word of the body. There were 5 rules. Rule 1, I was to drop, permanently and in writing, any further mention of the $12,000 I had loaned my sister Vanessa for her wedding photographer deposit 2 years earlier, money she had never repaid and had, as far as I could tell, forgotten she owed. Rule 2, I was not permitted to bring a +1 because my parents had decided, without asking me, that my ex-fiancé's cousin was also on the groom's side of the guest list, and they didn't want any awkwardness. Rule 3, I would sit at table 14 in the back corner near the kitchen doors, next to my second cousins, whom I had met exactly twice in my life, because the family table had already been arranged around people who matter to Vanessa's day. Rule 4, I was to contribute $8,000 toward the open bar, which my parents framed not as a request, but as "what's fair," since you don't have kids to save for. Rule 5, the one that made my hands go cold when I read it, was that I had to sign a document, an actual document, attached as a PDF, stating that I would never again discuss, publicly or privately, the situation with Grandma Ruth's house. At the bottom, in my father's handwriting scanned into the email, were the words, "Agree to all 5, and we'll see you there. We hope you understand." I did not cry. I want to say that clearly, because I think people expect the crying to come first. But it didn't. What I felt was something quieter and colder, something that settled into my chest like a stone finding the bottom of a lake. Because Rule 5 wasn't really about a wedding at all. Rule 5 was about a house, and I already knew things about that house that my parents did not know I knew. Before I explain what I did next, let me take you back, because you need to understand who I had been for the last 11 years, before you'll understand who I decided to become that afternoon. I am the older daughter. Vanessa is younger by 4 years, and for as long as I can remember, our family operated on an unspoken exchange rate where her needs were emergencies and mine were inconveniences. When Vanessa dropped out of her first college program, it was a rough patch. When I asked to borrow the car for a job interview, I was being difficult. When Vanessa's first business, a candle company that lasted 8 months, went under, my parents quietly covered $11,000 of her supplier debt and never mentioned it again. When I asked for $400 to help cover a dental emergency the year I was 24, my mother told me that money didn't grow on trees and that I should learn to budget better. I want to be fair here, because fairness matters to me even now. My parents were not cruel people in any dramatic sense. They didn't scream. They didn't hit. What they did was quieter and, in its way, more corrosive. They simply decided, somewhere early on, which daughter needed protecting and which daughter could protect herself. And once you are cast as the daughter who can handle things, you handle things. You handle them for so long that everyone around you forgets it was ever a choice you made, rather than a fact about who you are. I remember one specific afternoon when I was 16, and Vanessa was 12. I had saved for 4 months to buy a second-hand bicycle from a boy 2 streets over, mowing lawns and babysitting, until I had exactly the $90 he was asking. The week after I bought it, Vanessa decided she wanted to learn to ride, and my mother suggested, gently at first, that I let her use mine until she got the hang of it. Gently turned into an expectation within a month. By the end of that summer, the bicycle sat on Vanessa's side of the garage, and when I finally asked, quietly, if I could have a turn on my own bike, my mother told me I was too old for that anyway, and that it was sweet of me to share. I was 16. I do not think anyone in my family remembers that summer at all. I have never forgotten it because it was the first time I understood, without anyone saying it directly, that things that were mine had a way of becoming things that were available, if Vanessa wanted them badly enough. That pattern repeated itself in larger and larger versions as we got older. My first car, a A used sedan I bought with my own savings at 19 became the car Vanessa borrowed for a full semester of her sophomore year of college, while mine sat unused in my parents' driveway 3 states away. Because I was living in a dorm and didn't need it as urgently as she did. When I brought it up, my father told me I should be grateful I could even afford a car in the first place, as though gratitude and resentment were somehow mutually exclusive. I learned, slowly and then completely, that the fastest way to keep peace in my family was to stop asking for anything back. So when Vanessa called me crying 2 years ago because her photographer was demanding a $12,000 deposit and her fiancé's family wasn't able to help right now, I did what I had always done. I transferred the money the same afternoon. She promised to pay me back within 6 months, once her new marketing contract started paying out. 18 months passed. I brought it up once, gently, at Thanksgiving, and my mother pulled me into the hallway and told me that this wasn't the time, that Vanessa was under enough stress, and that I should let it go for the sake of the family. I let it go. I always let it go. But Rule 5 was different, because Rule 5 reached backward into something I had been quietly investigating for almost a year, something none of them knew I had found. My grandmother, Ruth, died 3 years ago and left behind a small brick house on Delmore Street, the house I had spent every summer of my childhood in, the house with the cherry tree in the backyard that my grandfather had planted the year my mother was born. In her will, Grandma Ruth left the house to be divided equally between Vanessa and me, with the explicit instruction, written in her own hand and notarized, that neither of us was to be pressured into selling it before we turned 35. She wanted us to have time. She wanted us to have a choice. 8 months after she died, my mother told me the house had been sold to settle Grandma's remaining debts, and that whatever was left after the estate costs had gone toward keeping things fair for the family. I was told there was nothing left to distribute. I was 29 at the time, grieving, exhausted, and I believed her, because it did not occur to me that my own mother would lie to me about my grandmother's dying wish. Here's the part I need you to sit with for a second, because it changes everything that comes after. Tell me honestly if you found out, even years later, that a promise made to you by someone who loved you had been quietly broken by the people who were supposed to protect that promise. What would you do first? Would you confront them immediately, or would you wait and gather the truth first, the way I did? I'm genuinely curious how you'd handle it, so let me know in the comments where you're watching this from, because I think the answer says a lot about a person. If stories like this one, about families, boundaries, and the slow work of finally standing up for yourself, speak to you, I'd love it if you subscribed and stuck around, because there's a lot more to this story, and I promise you, it does not end where you think it does. It was my cousin Deb, Grandma Ruth's niece, and the only person on that side of the family who still called me just to talk, who let it slip during a phone call 14 months ago. She mentioned, casually, that she'd run into someone at the farmer's market who lived in the old Whitfield place on Delmore, and that the new owners had renovated the kitchen beautifully. I asked her what she meant. She backpedaled immediately, the way people do when they realize they've said something they weren't supposed to say, and told me to forget it, that it wasn't her business. It took me 4 months of quiet, careful work to find the truth, because I did not want to accuse my parents of something I could not prove. I am an accountant. I know how to read documents, and I know how to find the ones people hope you'll never look for. I requested the probate records from the county courthouse. I found the sale listing, archived on a real estate site, dated 7 months after Grandma Ruth's death. The house had sold for $340,000. I found the closing documents through a title search I paid a lawyer friend to help me access. My parents' signatures were on the transfer as co-executors of the estate. Mine was not. Vanessa's was not. There was a durable power of attorney, allegedly signed by both of us, authorizing our parents to act on our behalf in the sale. I never signed that power of attorney. I have never even seen it before that day. I sat with that discovery for 3 full weeks before I told a single person, replaying the moment over and over, wondering if there was some innocent explanation I was too angry to see. Maybe I had signed something during the chaos of the funeral without fully reading it. Maybe there was a second document, a legitimate one, that I simply couldn't locate. I am an accountant by training, and one thing my job has taught me is to distrust the story that makes you feel better before you've actually checked the numbers. So I checked the numbers. I pulled my own signature from 4 different sources spanning the 2 years before and after the estate closed. My mortgage refinance paperwork, my passport renewal application, a notarized document from a fender-bender insurance claim, and the lease renewal for my apartment. I laid them all out on my kitchen table one Sunday night, next to a printed copy of the signature on the power of attorney, and even without any training, something about it looked wrong to me. The loop on the C in my first name was different. The pressure at the end of my last name tapered in a way mine never does. I always press down harder at the end of a signature, a habit left over from years of signing client documents quickly. I sat with that discovery for a long time before I did anything about it, because I wanted to be sure, and because some part of me, the part that had spent 30 years being the daughter who handles things quietly, still hoped there was an explanation. I hired a forensic document examiner, a woman named Patricia, who had testified in 3 cases involving forged estate documents. She compared my genuine signature, pulled from my mortgage paperwork and my passport renewal, against the signature on the power of attorney. Her written conclusion was direct. The signature attributed to me showed inconsistencies in stroke pressure, letter formation, and pen lift patterns that were, in her professional opinion, highly unlikely to have originated from the same hand. In plainer terms, someone had forged my signature to sell my grandmother's house. I had been sitting on that report for 6 weeks when the wedding email arrived. Rule 5, telling me to sign away my right to ever discuss the situation with Grandma Ruth's house, was not a coincidence. Someone I still don't fully know, if it was my mother, my father, or both of them together, had realized I was asking questions, and they had decided the safest way to silence me was to bury the demand inside a wedding. That was the moment the stone in my chest turned into something else. Not rage, exactly. Clarity. I did not respond to the email for 3 days. I know they expected me to call, to plead, to negotiate the way I always had. Instead, I spent those 3 days doing 3 things. First, I met with an estate attorney and filed the paperwork to formally contest the fraudulent power of attorney and reopen the estate for review, a process that, once filed, could not be quietly withdrawn by anyone but me. Second, I compiled everything: the forensic report, the closing documents, the original will, time-stamped copies of every message where my mother told me there was nothing left, into a single folder. Third, I booked a hotel room 40 minutes from the wedding venue, because I intended to be nearby on the day itself, even though I already knew, with complete certainty, that I would not be attending. On the Friday deadline, I sent one reply to my parents' email. It contained 4 sentences. I declined all 5 conditions. I would not be attending the wedding. I would be exercising my legal right to contest the estate. And I attached, without further comment, the forensic examiner's signed report. I did not receive a response for 11 hours. When it came, it was not from my mother or my father. It was a voicemail from Vanessa, her voice cracking, asking what I was trying to do to her wedding, asking why I would choose now, of all times, to bring up old business. I listened to it twice. I did not call back. The wedding took place 9 days later. I was not there, and I did not need to be, because what happened that day did not require my presence at all. It only required the paperwork I had already set in motion to reach the people who needed to see it. Here is what I learned afterward, pieced together from Deb, from my aunt, and eventually from my father himself, in a conversation I will get to shortly. The estate attorney I hired had, as part of the standard reopening process, sent formal notice to every party listed on the original probate filing, which included not only my parents but the title insurance company that had underwritten the sale of the house, and the buyers themselves, a young couple named the Ferraros who had purchased the Delmore Street property in good faith, unaware that the transfer might be legally compromised. That notice arrived at the title insurance company's offices on the Wednesday before the wedding. Standard procedure, when a forged power of attorney is credibly alleged in a property transfer, is to immediately flag the file and notify all parties of a potential title defect, because it affects insurability and any future resale. The Ferraros' mortgage lender received a copy as a matter of course. So did my parents, listed as the executors of record. My mother has since told me, in the one real conversation we've had since all of this began, that the notice arrived at their house the morning of the wedding rehearsal dinner. She said my father read it standing in the kitchen and that his hands were shaking so badly he had to set his coffee down. She said neither of them said a word about it to Vanessa because they didn't want to ruin her night, which is, I think, the most honest thing my mother has ever said to me because it confirms exactly what I already knew, that protecting the appearance of the family had always mattered more than protecting the truth inside it. The wedding itself went forward, 200 guests, an open bar my parents had asked me to help fund, a seating chart that placed me nowhere because I wasn't there to be placed. I've been told the ceremony was beautiful. I've been told Vanessa cried during her vows. I believe both of those things, and I want to be honest with you. Some small, old part of me was sad I missed it. Sad in the plain human way. You're sad when you miss something that used to matter to you. But sadness and regret are not the same thing, and I want to be clear that I do not regret the choice I made. Before I tell you what happened at the rehearsal dinner and how the news actually reached my parents in front of people they couldn't control the narrative around, I want to pause and ask you something. Have you ever found out that a piece of paperwork, something small and bureaucratic, was quietly working in the background to reveal a truth that a family had spent years trying to bury? I'd love to know if you've lived through something like that yourself. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from tonight, and whether it's late where you are or still daylight, because I always like picturing exactly who's on the other side of this story. Deb told me later that the notice didn't just arrive at my parents' house quietly through the mail slot, the way I'd assumed it would. Because the title company's compliance department flagged it as a potential fraud matter rather than a routine paperwork issue, an actual representative called my father's cell phone directly the morning of the rehearsal dinner to confirm receipt and explain next steps. My father was standing in the private dining room of the restaurant when the call came in, surrounded by both sets of in-laws and the wedding planner, and he had to step outside to take it. My aunt, who was seated close enough to notice, said he came back in looking pale and distracted, and that my mother asked him twice what was wrong before he finally muttered something about a work thing and asked the waiter for a second scotch. The real conversation happened 11 days later, when my father called and asked to meet me for coffee, alone. I said yes, because I wanted to look at him when he explained it, if he was going to try. He looked older than I remembered, though it had only been a few weeks. His hands wrapped around his coffee cup the entire time we talked, as though he needed something to hold on to. He told me that the sale of the house had happened because he and my mother had taken out a second mortgage on their own home 4 years ago to cover Vanessa's business debts, the ones I had never fully known the size of, and that by the time Grandma Ruth passed, they were far enough underwater that they panicked. He said the debt had ballooned past $60,000 once you counted the supplier settlements, the storage unit fees for unsold inventory, and a small business loan Vanessa had personally guaranteed and then defaulted on. He said that when the house became available to sell, it felt, in the moment, like the only door that was still open. He said the power of attorney had been drawn up by a family friend who worked in real estate, someone who assured them it was just a formality to speed up the paperwork, and that he genuinely, and I want to believe this part, did not fully register at the time that neither Vanessa nor I had actually signed it ourselves. He said my mother had handled that part of the process, had brought him the papers already prepared, and that he had signed his portion without reading every page closely, trusting that she had. I asked him if that made him feel any less responsible. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "No, it doesn't. I should have read it." That admission, small as it was, mattered more to me than almost anything else he said that morning, because it was the first time in my adult life I had heard my father accept blame without immediately reaching for a reason it wasn't really his fault. He said he was sorry. He did not, notably, say that he thought what happened was wrong, only that he was sorry it had come to this. I asked him one question, the only question that mattered to me by that point. I asked him whether, if I had simply signed the 5 conditions and shown up to the wedding smiling, he would ever have told me the truth about the house at all. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Probably not." I think that was the most honest thing either of my parents has said to me in 3 years, and I think it was worth everything it cost to hear it. The estate case is still moving through the process. My attorney tells me these things take time, that the title insurance company will likely settle to protect the Ferraro's ownership and make me and Vanessa whole through a claim against the policy. since the fraud happened at the transfer stage rather than through any fault of the current owners. I don't know exactly how it will resolve financially. What I know is that the truth is now on the record, permanently. In a way, it cannot be quietly walked back over a family dinner. Vanessa has not spoken to me since the wedding. I understand, in a distant way, why she's angry. Her wedding day now has an asterisk on it that will follow her family for years, and she did not create the situation with the house, even if she benefited from staying comfortably unaware of it. I've told her, through one message I sent and never received a reply to, that my issue was never with her wedding. It was with the 5 conditions that she used her wedding as leverage to buy my silence about a fraud committed against both of us. I don't know if she'll ever see it that way. I hope, someday, she does, because the $12,000 I loaned her and never mentioned again feels, now, like the smallest debt in this entire story. My mother and I speak occasionally, carefully, the way you speak to someone you're still deciding whether to trust again. She has not apologized in the direct way I once imagined I needed her to. The closest she came was during a phone call about 6 weeks after the wedding, when she told me, in a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from her, that she used to tell herself the house situation was temporary, that she always planned to make it right once things settled down, and that she genuinely believed, for a while, that the debt would resolve itself before it ever became something I needed to know about. I told her that temporary had lasted 3 years, and that the only reason it ever stopped being temporary was that I found it myself. Not because she chose to tell me. She didn't have an answer for that. I didn't expect one. What she has done since then is stop asking me to be quiet, which, for her, might be the closest thing to an apology I ever get, and I've decided I can live inside that uncertainty rather than waiting for a version of closure that may never come. We've had 2 dinners together since, just the 2 of us, at a small Italian place halfway between our houses that neither of us has any memories attached to, which I think we both chose on purpose. We don't talk about the house. We talk about her garden, about a work trip I'm planning, about nothing at all, really, and I've realized that sometimes rebuilding something doesn't look like a resolution. It looks like 2 people practicing being careful with each other again, one ordinary dinner at a time. I think about the cherry tree in Grandma Ruth's backyard sometimes. I think about the summer I turned 11, when she taught me how to tell if the cherries were ripe just by the give of the skin under my thumb, and how she used to say that some things couldn't be rushed, no matter how badly you wanted them. I think about how she wrote, in her own hand, that she wanted us to have time before anyone could pressure us into giving that house up. I think she knew, somehow, that time was the thing our family was worst at protecting, that we would always reach for the fastest, quietest fix, rather than sit with a hard truth long enough to handle it properly. I think she was right, and I think some part of her must have known it might come to exactly this, which is maybe why she put it in writing, instead of just trusting us to remember. I've started looking at old photos of that house again, something I couldn't bring myself to do for the first year, after I found out it was gone. There's one from the summer I was 14, Vanessa and me sitting on the porch steps with popsicles, both of us squinting into the sun, no idea yet what either of us would become to each other. I keep that photo on my desk now, not as a wound, but as a reminder of what I'm actually trying to protect. By doing all of this, not the money, not even really the house, but the idea that the people who are supposed to love you shouldn't get to decide, quietly and on your behalf, what parts of the truth you're allowed to have. So let me ask you the same question I've been asking myself since that email arrived 19 days before a wedding I never attended. If the price of belonging in your family was staying silent about something you knew was wrong, would you pay it? Or would you do what I did and let the silence cost you the seat at the table instead? Thank you for spending this time with me and with this story. All characters, names, and events depicted here are fictional, created for entertainment and reflection, and are not intended to represent any real individuals or events. If this story resonated with you, I hope it reminds you of something simple. Loyalty that requires your silence is never really loyalty at all. It was just a quieter kind of cost, waiting to be paid.